My daughter and her husband staged an intervention, claiming I was too old for a new relationship and needed to protect my assets. They saw me as a doddering fool. So I listened, married the brilliant woman I love, and made her co-owner of everything they hoped to inherit. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, a time I usually reserved for quiet reading. I had just settled into my favorite leather armchair, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, the gentle weight of my late wife Laura's Afghan across my lap. For the first time in 3 years, the silence in my large, empty house had started to feel less like a crushing weight and more like a peaceful quiet. That peace was about to be shattered. I opened the door to find my daughter Jessica and her husband Brandon standing on the porch. They wore matching expressions of grave concern, the kind of look one reserves for delivering terrible news. Jessica held a grocery bag that I would soon discover contained a store-bought lasagna, the official casserole of family interventions. "Dad," Jessica said, her voice heavy with manufactured sympathy, "can we come in? We need to talk." They swept past me into the living room, a space I had designed and built with my own two hands, a testament to a long career as a civil engineer. It was a room of warm woods and sturdy beams, a place of comfort. Tonight it felt like an ambush zone. Brandon, a real estate agent who always looked slightly out of place in clothes that were a size too tight and a price tag too high, surveyed the room as if he were already measuring for drapes. "We're worried about you, Dad," Jessica began once they were seated opposite me. She leaned forward, her hands clasped. "Deeply worried." I adjusted my glasses, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "Worried? About what? My blood pressure is excellent, the doctor says." "It's not about your health," Brandon chimed in, taking over as if they'd rehearsed. "It's about Isabel." The name hung in the air, Isabel. The sound of it had for the past 6 months been a source of unexpected joy. She was a brilliant, funny, and compassionate woman I'd met at a local grief support group, a place neither of us needed anymore. We had bonded over our shared losses and to our mutual surprise found a shared hope for the future. She was a retired judge, a woman of formidable intellect and surprising warmth. Loving her felt like coming home after a long, weary journey. "What about Isabel?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Jessica took a deep breath. "Dad, you're 58, you're at a vulnerable stage. This is all happening so fast. A woman like that, you have to be careful. People can be predatory." "A woman like what?" I asked, the drumming in my chest growing louder. "A successful, intelligent, financially independent widow." Brandon scoffed, a barely concealed sneer on his face. "That's what she tells you. Jessica and I just feel this whole relationship is inappropriate. For a man of your age, after everything you've been through, you should be thinking about your legacy, about family." He meant their family, he meant their inheritance. The subtext was as subtle as a sledgehammer. My home, my company shares, the portfolio I had spent a lifetime building, they saw it all slipping through their fingers, rerouted to a woman they didn't know and refused to trust. They weren't seeing their father finding happiness. They were seeing a walking, talking bank account making an unauthorized withdrawal. I looked at my daughter, the little girl I had taught to ride a bike, the young woman whose university tuition I had paid without a second thought, whose lavish wedding I had funded, whose down payment on her oversized house I had gifted. I saw no trace of that girl in the cold, calculating eyes staring back at me. She wasn't my Jessica. She was an accountant auditing my heart. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp, piercing blade of ice lodging itself in my chest. For 3 years I had navigated the hollow corridors of grief alone. They had visited on holidays, made their obligatory phone calls, but they had never once sat with me in the darkness. Now, the moment I found a flicker of light, they arrived with a fire extinguisher, claiming it was for my own good. The betrayal was worse than the loneliness had ever been. After they left, the lasagna sat on my kitchen counter like a tombstone. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt contaminated by their suspicion. I walked from room to room, touching the frames of photos, Laura vibrant and smiling, Jessica as a gap-toothed child on my shoulders. Had I been so blind? Had her love for me always been so transactional? I picked up the phone to call Isabel, needing to hear the reassuring calm of her voice, but hesitated. How could I tell her that my own daughter had essentially called her a gold digger? The shame of it burned in my gut. Instead, I sank back into my armchair, the silence no longer peaceful but echoing with their condescending words. Vulnerable, inappropriate, protect your legacy. The next morning, the expected phone call came. It was Jessica. Her voice, stripped of the previous night's theatrical concern, was now brisk and businesslike. "So, Dad, have you had some time to think?" she asked, no preamble, no "how are you feeling?" "I'm thinking," I said, my voice flat. "Good, because Brandon and I were talking, and we really think it would be wise for you to meet with a financial advisor we know, just to go over things. Make sure all your assets are structured properly to protect them, to protect us." There it was, the mask already slipping. It wasn't about my emotional well-being, it was about locking down the estate. It was about making sure the will remained unchanged, that no new names were added to any deeds or accounts. "Your concern is duly noted, Jessica," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "It's just that you've worked so hard your whole life, Dad," she continued, her voice softening into a wheedling tone I now recognized as manipulation. "Mom would have wanted us to make sure you were taken care of, that your legacy was preserved for your family." Invoking her mother's memory was a low blow, and it found its mark. A fresh wave of anger and sorrow washed over me. Laura would have been appalled. She had loved Jessica fiercely, but she had been a woman of immense integrity. She would have wanted my happiness above all else. Laura would have adored Isabel. "I have to go, Jessica," I said abruptly, ending the call before I said something I couldn't take back. I sat there for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand. They saw me as a relic, a walking museum of past achievements whose only remaining function was to bequeath its contents to the next generation. They saw a man in his late 50s as being over the hill, finished with life, incapable of making sound decisions about his own heart. They thought my grief had weakened my mind, made me soft and pliable. They thought the engineer who built bridges and designed foundations had forgotten how to recognize a faulty structure. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that an engineer's greatest skill isn't just building things up, it's understanding pressure points. It's knowing exactly where a structure is weakest and knowing precisely how to reinforce it or, if necessary, tear it down. They had started a fight over my foundation, and I was about to show them just how solid it really was. To understand the depth of the wound, you have to understand the sacrifices that came before it. When Laura passed, my world didn't just lose its color, it lost its structural integrity. She had been my partner in every sense for 35 years. Our life was a meticulously designed blueprint we had executed together. Her sudden absence was a seismic event that left gaping cracks in everything. Jessica, then 29, was naturally devastated, but her grief seemed to manifest as a series of demands. She needed me, she needed help planning the funeral, she needed me to talk to the lawyers, she needed me to be the strong one, the stoic father, the rock. I packed my own sorrow into a deep hidden vault and became what she required. In the months that followed, it continued. Her car broke down, I bought her a new one. She and Brandon wanted to move to a bigger house in a more exclusive neighborhood. I provided the down payment, a sum that made even me blink. "It's an investment in our future, Dad," she'd said. "For our kids, your future grandkids." Every request was framed as a necessity, every gift accepted as a given. Brandon, the struggling real estate agent, was the worst. He spoke of my assets with a casual, proprietary air as if he were already the custodian. "We should really look at upgrading the insulation in this place, Matthew," he'd say, patting the wall of my study. "It'll improve the resale value down the line." He never said your resale value. It was always the resale value. My generosity was mistaken for infinite liquidity, my paternal love for a line of credit with no limit. I never complained. She was my only child. I thought I was shoring up her future, giving her the security Laura would have wanted for her. I see now I was only funding a lifestyle and nurturing a sense of entitlement that was about to be weaponized against me. Then I met Isabel. Our first conversation was about roses. I was fumbling with a wilting bouquet I'd brought to Laura's memorial site, and she was tending to the plot of her late husband, a man she'd loved for 4 decades. She showed me how to properly trim the stems. We talked for an hour about gardening, about loss, about the strange, suspended state of being a widow or widower. Our relationship bloomed slowly, cautiously, like a flower in early spring. There was no whirlwind romance, just a steady, growing comfort. She was everything my daughter and her husband were not, discreet, respectful, and completely unimpressed by my financial status. When I told her I had founded and sold a successful engineering firm, she simply nodded. "It must be wonderful to have built something that lasts," she said. It was only later I learned of her own distinguished career. She was Judge Isabel Sterling, retired from the bench after 20 years in probate and estate law. She had presided over countless bitter family disputes, seen the absolute worst of what greed could do to people. Unlike Brandon, who saw my house as a future commission, Isabel saw it as my creation. She'd trace the lines of the exposed beams in the ceiling and say, "Tell me about the joinery, Matthew. It's beautiful." She was interested in the man who had built the life, not just the assets the life had produced. The intervention, therefore, was an attack not only on me but on her. Jessica and Brandon had painted her as some kind of scheming interloper. I finally called Isabel the day after Jessica's follow-up call. I confessed everything, my voice thick with shame. "They think you're after my money," I said, the words tasting like poison. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I braced myself for her to be hurt, offended, perhaps even to pull away. I would not have blamed her. Instead, I heard a soft, wry chuckle. "My dear Matthew," she said, her voice a balm on my frayed nerves. "I spent 2 decades watching children fight over their parents' silverware before the eulogy was even finished. I am completely unshockable. This isn't about you or me. This is about their fear." "It's my fault," I said. "I've spoiled her. I let it happen." "You loved your daughter," she corrected gently. "And now your daughter and her husband have presented you with a problem. You're an engineer, my love, and I'm a judge. Between the two of us, I think we can solve a problem." In that moment, the hurt began to recede, replaced by a cool, clear resolve. They had picked a fight with the wrong man, and they had no earthly idea who he was standing beside. The shift from victim to strategist was not instantaneous. It was a gradual crystallization of my anger and sorrow into a single, hard point of clarity. It happened during a walk with Isabel a few days after the intervention. The crisp autumn air seemed to clear the fog from my mind. "They see me as an old man," I said, kicking at a loose pile of leaves. "A sentimental fool who needs to be managed." Isabel tucked her arm through mine. "Their mistake is a common one. They've confused kindness with weakness. They've confused age with incompetence." She paused, looking at me with her intelligent, discerning eyes. "The question is, what are you going to do about it, Matthew?" That was the turning point. It was no longer a question of how I felt. It was a question of what I would do. I was a man of action, a builder. I had spent my life solving complex problems with logic and precision. This was just another, more personal, engineering problem. "I'm going to reinforce the foundation," I said, the metaphor coming naturally to my lips. Isabel smiled. "A sound engineering principle. And as your legal consultant, I can tell you that the best foundations are built on solid, legally binding contracts." And so the investigation and the plan began. It wasn't a matter of hiring a private investigator to dig up dirt on Brandon. His precarious financial situation and his desperate ambition were already obvious. Our investigation was quieter, more methodical. It took place in my study, a room filled with blueprints and reference books, and at Isabel's dining room table, which was soon covered in legal pads and folders. The clever trap wasn't a trap at all, it was a fortress. Isabel, with her encyclopedic knowledge of estate law, began to sketch out the strategy. The cornerstone of her plan was something called a Spousal Lifetime Access Trust, or SLAT, but even that, she explained, could be clunky and had certain limitations. "A trust is good," she explained one evening, tapping her pen on a notepad. "But the cleanest, most immediate, and most unassailable move is far simpler. It begins with a marriage certificate." My heart skipped a beat. We had talked about marriage, but in vague, someday in the future terms. Suddenly, the future was now. "Are you proposing to me, Judge Sterling?" I asked, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I'm presenting a legal option, Mr. Hayes," she retorted, her eyes twinkling. "A very effective one. Once we are married, we can retitle every significant asset you own, the house, the invest. Accounts the shares in your old firm into joint ownership. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. It's a legal firewall. Upon your death, ownership passes directly to me and vice versa. It completely bypasses probate. It bypasses the will. It is immediate and for all practical purposes unbreakable." She then outlined the second phase. For the assets that couldn't be jointly titled so easily, like the business itself, we would create a new, ironclad marital trust. We would be co-trustees. All decisions would have to be made jointly. "Your daughter and her husband believe your estate is a pie waiting to be sliced," Isabel said, her voice firm. "We are going to take that pie, place it in a locked box, and give the only 2 keys to you and me." The sheer elegance of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a scheme born of anger or revenge. It was a strategic masterstroke of protection, a legal bulwark to secure our future and our happiness. In the meantime, I played my part. I let Jessica's and Brandon's calls go to voicemail. When Jessica finally cornered me at the grocery store a week later, her frustration was palpable. "Dad, you're avoiding me. Have you spoken to that advisor?" I adopted a weary, thoughtful expression. Jessica, you gave me a lot to think about. I'm taking it all under advisement. In fact, I added, delivering the line Isabel and I had rehearsed. I've decided to meet with my own legal counsel to get all my affairs in order. You were right. It's time to be prudent. A wave of relief washed over her face. She and Brandon had won. The foolish old man was finally listening to reason. She thought I was meeting with a lawyer to write her and her husband into my plans more securely. She had no idea I was meeting with a lawyer and a judge to write them out. "Oh, Dad, that's so wise," she said, patting my arm with sickening condescension. "I'm so glad you're seeing things clearly now." They had forgotten one crucial thing. An engineer knows that before you pour a new foundation, you must first clear the site of all unstable ground. We decided against a long engagement. What was the point? We were not young kids seeking parental approval. We were two people in the prime of our later years who knew precisely what we wanted. We wanted each other. We wanted peace. We were married a week later at the local courthouse on a sunny Friday morning. The only witnesses were two of Isabel's old friends, a retired literature professor and a cheerful cardiologist. There were no frills, no grand pronouncements. It was a quiet, profound declaration. When the justice of the peace pronounced us husband and wife, I felt a sense of rightness that settled deep in my bones. I slipped a simple, elegant platinum band onto Isabel's finger, and she did the same for me. Driving home, her hand in mine, I felt not like a man who had won a battle, but like a man who had finally reached a safe harbor. The first phase of the plan was complete. The second phase began the following Monday. Isabel had made an appointment with her former law partner, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diana, who specialized in executing the very trusts Isabel used to preside over. The three of us sat in a sleek, modern conference room. For the next 2 hours, we systematically went through every asset I owned. Diana's team worked with breathtaking efficiency. Forms were signed, deeds were prepared for red idling, and the framework for the Hayes-Sterling Marital Trust was erected. By the end of the day, the financial fortress was built. My house was now Matthew Hayes and Isabel Sterling, joint tenants with rights of survivorship. My primary investment portfolio was similarly red-idled. The rest was funneled into the trust, with Judge Isabel Sterling and I as equal co-trustees. With the legal work done, it was time for the reveal. Isabel suggested we not just mail an announcement. "This requires a more formal notification," she said with a judicial glint in her eye. I sent a simple text message to both Jessica and Brandon. "I have an update on my estate planning. I would like to discuss it with you both. Please come to my office this Saturday at 11 a.m. My office was a large, sunlit room I'd built over the detached garage years ago. It was my professional space, filled with my drafting table, my reference books, and the awards my firm had won. It was a place of authority, a place where I was not Dad or Matthew, but Mr. Hayes, the engineer. They arrived exactly on time, striding in with an air of triumphant expectation. Brandon was wearing a suit as if he were attending a board meeting where he was about to be named CEO. Jessica gave me a tight, smug smile. They believed this was it, the moment their intervention paid off, the moment I would lay out the details of the fortune they were so eager to protect. They stopped dead in the doorway. Isabel was sitting beside me at my large oak desk. She wasn't knitting or reading a magazine. She was sitting upright, a leather-bound folio in front of her, looking every inch the judge she once was. My new platinum wedding band caught the light as I gestured to the two chairs opposite us. "Jessica, Brandon, thank you for coming," I said calmly. "Please have a seat." The air crackled with tension. Their confident smiles vanished, replaced by confusion and dawning suspicion. "What's she doing here?" Brandon stammered, nodding curtly at Isabel. "Isabel is here because she is my wife," I said simply. I held up my left hand, showing them the ring. "We were married last Friday." The silence that followed was absolute. Jessica's face went pale, her mouth falling slightly open. Brandon's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. The color rose in his neck. "You did what?" Jessica finally whispered, her voice a strangled squeak. "I got married," I repeated. "And per your very astute advice, Jessica, I have taken significant steps to get my affairs in order and protect my legacy. We wanted to walk you through the changes." Isabel slid two thin document packages across the desk toward them. "If you'll look at the first page," she said, her voice even and professional, "you'll find a copy of our marriage certificate. The subsequent pages contain the updated deeds for this property and the main investment accounts. You'll note they have been red-idled under joint tenancy." Brandon, the real estate agent, snatched the papers. His eyes scanned the legal jargon and he understood the implications immediately. His face went from flushed to ashen. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, he choked out. What have you done? I have secured my assets as you urged me to, I replied. The house you're so concerned about, Isabel and I now own it equally. Should anything happen to me, it becomes hers entirely outside of any will. The same goes for the bulk of my liquid investments. And the rest, Isabel continued, picking up the narrative seamlessly, including all shares in Matthew's former company and his other holdings, have been placed in a marital trust. We are the sole co-trustees. All decisions require mutual consent. She paused, letting the information sink in. To put it in layman's terms for you, the estate you were so worried about is now, for all intents and purposes, a joint marital asset. It is fully protected. Protected from them, the unsaid words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as glass. Jessica was still speechless, her eyes wide with disbelief and betrayal. It was Brandon who finally cracked. This is a trick, he spat, his voice rising. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at Isabel. This was your idea, you're a predator, a con artist, you've manipulated him. Isabel didn't flinch, she simply looked at him with an expression of mild pity. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice dropping into a steely, judicial tone, I would advise you to sit down and lower your voice. Accusations of that nature are not only baseless, but they could also be considered slander. And believe me, as a retired judge who specialized in this very field, I can assure you that every document in front of you is legally unassailable. We have been very, very thorough. Her calm, authoritative response completely deflated him. He sank back into his chair, sputtering, his poorly executed threat dissolving into nothing. The con artist wasn't Isabel. The con artists were sitting right across the desk from us. The aftermath of that meeting was a week of escalating, desperate maneuvers from Jessica and Brandon. The initial shock curdled into frantic denial, followed by clumsy attempts to regain control. The first salvo was a barrage of emotional texts to my phone. From Jessica, how could you do this to me, to Mom's memory? After everything we've been through, I don't even know who you are anymore. From Brandon, you need to undo this. We can get you lawyers, real lawyers, she's obviously brainwashed you. This is elder abuse. The accusation of elder abuse was particularly pathetic. I was a 58-year-old man in perfect health who had just made the most clear-headed decision of his life. Isabel and I read the messages with a sense of weary sadness. Their panic was so transparent. Their next move was an attempt to rally the family. Jessica called my sister, Carol, weeping about how a vulture had sunk her claws into her poor, grieving father. Unfortunately for Jessica, Carol was a practical woman who had met and instantly liked Isabel. Jessica called me, Carol told me over the phone later that day. She was hysterical, said you'd been taken advantage of. I told her, Jessica, your father is one of the smartest men I know. And that Isabel is a lovely woman. Maybe the problem isn't with them, it's with your expectations. Their attempt to isolate me had failed. Thwarted, they grew more desperate. Brandon, it turned out, had a cousin W. Ho was a lawyer, a divorce attorney of all things. This cousin sent a blustering, poorly drafted letter to my office, full of vague threats about contesting the marriage and investigating Isabel for undue influence. This was where they made their final, fatal mistake. They had challenged a judge on her own turf. Isabel read the letter, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. Undue influence, they want to build a case. Oh dear, they have no idea what they're doing. She went to her own office, a room in her home that was as neat and organized as mine, and returned with a thick file. When I knew we were getting serious, Matthew, I did my own due diligence. Not on you, my love, on them. My heart sank. What did you find? Nothing illegal, she said quickly. Just a pattern of behavior. I had a paralegal I trust pull some public records. Brandon is in significant debt. He has 3 outstanding loans against his own business, and his real estate sales for the last 2 years have been abysmal. And Jessica, she paused, her expression softening with sympathy. Her credit card statements must be astronomical. The car, the clothes, the vacations, they are living a life funded by a bank that they assumed would never close. The bank of Dad. She then picked up the threatening letter from Brandon's cousin. An undue influence claim requires them to prove that you were not of sound mind and that I coerced you into a decision you would not have otherwise made. It's notoriously difficult to prove. So what do we do? I asked. We don't just defend, my love, she said, her eyes flashing with strategic fire. We build our own case, we document everything, their intervention, their texts, their financial motives, this letter. She tapped it with her finger. This is a gift. This is them formally documenting their own greed. We won't even need to present most of it. We just need to let them know that we have it. She arranged a second meeting. This time, not in my office, but at the formal, intimidating conference room of her former law partner, Diana. The invitation was sent via certified mail to Jessica, Brandon, and their legal counsel. They arrived looking less confident this time, more belligerent. Their lawyer cousin, a young man who looked barely out of law school, radiated a misplaced swagger. This time, Isabel led the meeting. She didn't speak with emotion, but with the cold, irrefutable precision of a judge issuing a ruling. "We have received your letter," she began, her voice echoing slightly in the large, wood-paneled room. "It contains several serious and frankly defamatory allegations. Before you proceed down this very expensive and fruitless path, I wanted to provide you with some context." She gestured to Diana, who slid a thick binder across the table. "In this binder, you will find a full accounting of Matthew's financial support to his daughter and son-in-law over the last 3 years. You will find public records detailing Mr. Brandon's business debts. You will find a timeline of events, beginning with your unsolicited intervention and ending with the letter you sent us." She leaned forward. "You will also find sworn affidavits from my 2 friends who witnessed our wedding, both of whom are medical and academic professionals, attesting to Matthew's clear and sound state of mind. You will find a letter from his own physician confirming the same. And finally, you will find a preliminary draft of a countersuit for slander and intentional infliction of emotional distress." She sat back, letting the weight of her words fill the room. "Now," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly as she looked at Jessica, "we can proceed down that road. It will be public, it will be messy. Or you can accept that your father is a grown man who has made a decision to secure his own happiness. The choice is yours." Jessica stared at the binder as if it were a snake. She looked at Brandon, whose face had gone slack with shock. She looked at her cousin, who was visibly wilting under the combined force of Isabel's legal authority and Diana's silent, steely glare. The spell was broken. The fight went out of her eyes, replaced by a dawning, horrifying understanding of just how badly they had miscalculated. She finally understood she wasn't fighting her father. She was fighting a judge, and she had just been shown evidence that would cause her to lose the case before it even began. The binder sat on the polished mahogany table between us, a monument to their folly. The air in the conference room was thick with the silence of defeat. Brandon's lawyer cousin cleared his throat, shuffling his papers with a feigned nonchalance that fooled no one. He was out of his depth and he knew it. It was Jessica who finally broke. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time she looked not like a calculating antagonist but like a lost and profoundly sad young woman. The armor of her entitlement had been stripped away, and what was left was raw, painful regret. "I don't understand," she whispered, her gaze fixed on me. "Why, Dad, why do it like this? Why so harsh?" I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table. For the first time, I let the full weight of my hurt show in my voice. "Harsh?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "You and your husband came into my home, the home I built with your mother, and you called the woman I love a predator. You treated me like a child, like my mind was failing. You spoke of my life's work as if it were already yours to manage. You didn't ask about my happiness. You didn't care that for the first time in 3 years I wasn't lonely anymore. You only cared about the money." That, Jessica, was harsh. Tears welled in her eyes and began to stream down her cheeks. They weren't tears of theatrical manipulation, but of genuine shame. She looked at Brandon, whose face was a mask of sullen anger. He refused to meet her gaze, instead staring at the grain of the wood on the table. In that moment, the final fissure in their united front appeared. She saw him for what he was, the architect of this disastrous plan, a man whose greed had just cost her the one thing money couldn't buy: her father's trust. "The assets are secured, Jessica," I continued, my voice softening slightly. "My life with Isabel is secure, that is a fact, and it will not change." I paused, taking a deep breath. "What happens next with our relationship, however, that is up to you." Isabel, who had remained a figure of judicial calm, reached over and gently closed the binder. "We will not be filing the countersuit," she said quietly, speaking directly to Jessica. "This was never about punishing you, it was about protecting us." That simple act of grace seemed to break something in Brandon. His resentment finally boiled over into incoherent rage. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, shoving his chair back and standing up. "You think you've won? You've just destroyed this family, that's what you've done. You've turned his own daughter against him." "No, Brandon," Jessica said, her voice surprisingly strong through her tears. She stood up to face him, her expression one of newfound, devastating clarity. "You did this. I did this. We were so worried about Dad's legacy we forgot about his life. We were so worried about what we might lose that we threw away what we had. She turned back to me. I am so sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. It wasn't a complete absolution. The damage was too deep for a single apology to heal. But it was a start. It was the first honest thing she had said to me in weeks. The showdown was over. Brandon's cousin quickly gathered his things, mumbling something about withdrawing his representation. Brandon, sputtering and red-faced, gave Jessica one last look of furious betrayal before storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Jessica just stood there weeping quietly. Isabel and Diana discreetly left the conference room, giving us a moment alone. I stood up and walked around the table. I didn't hug her, it was too soon for that. I simply placed a hand on her shoulder. Go home, Jessica, I said gently. Figure out what you want, not what you think you're owed, but what you truly want your life to look like. When you know the answer to that, you know how to find me. She nodded, unable to speak, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the silence and the closed binder that held the blueprint of my new, secure life. The public humiliation was not in a grand, crowded room, but in the sterile quiet of a legal office, where their greed was systematically and irrefutably laid bare. The triumphant moment was not a shout of victory, but a daughter's quiet, broken apology, and the final, decisive action was her turning her back on her husband's greed and taking the first, tentative step back toward me. In the weeks that followed, a profound quiet settled over our lives. The angry texts stopped, the threatening letters ceased. The silence from Jessica and Brandon was absolute, but unlike the lonely silence of my grief, this was a silence of peace. Isabel and I took the time to simply be married. We traveled, we gardened, we hosted small dinner parties with friends. We filled my large house, our large house, with laughter and conversation. The foundation was secure, and we were finally building a new life upon it. The first casualty of the fallout was, predictably, Jessica and Brandon's marriage. About a month after the meeting, Jessica called me. Her voice was small, humbled. He's moved out, she said. He blames me. He says I lost my nerve. But the truth is, I think I just found it. She told me that once the prospect of my inheritance was gone, the gilded cage of their life became a cramped, ugly prison. The arguments were constant, all about money. Brandon's financial desperation, no longer cushioned by the prospect of my wealth, became a crushy. NG reality. He never loved me, she said, a sad acceptance in her voice. He loved my father's daughter. He loved the idea of what you could provide. I didn't say I told you so. I just listened. It was what she needed. Our conversations became more frequent after that, short calls and tentative visits. There was an awkwardness between us, a chasm of hurt that wouldn't be bridged overnight, but we were talking again. She was working 2 jobs now, trying to manage the massive mortgage on her own. She was humbled, changed. The entitlement had been burned away by harsh reality. Isabel, with her characteristic grace, was the one who encouraged me to be patient. She's finding her way back, Matthew, she would say. Give her time. The final piece of the resolution came from an unexpected quarter. Diana, Isabel's lawyer, called me about 3 months later. You're not going to believe this, she said. Brandon's cousin, the lawyer, he filed a formal complaint against Isabel with the State Bar Association. Claimed she used her former judicial status to intimidate him. My blood ran cold for a moment, but Diana was laughing. The Bar Association dismissed it in less than a day, she continued. But they also opened an inquiry into him for filing a frivolous claim and for his client's behavior. It turns out Brandon had been bragging to people about how he was going to secure his senile father-in-law's estate. The inquiry is looking into him for conspiracy to commit fraud. It's a long shot that it will lead to charges, but it's going to tie him up in legal fees for the foreseeable future. He played with fire, and the fire department showed up. The news of Brandon's self-inflicted downfall didn't bring me joy, but a sense of grim justice. He had created his own consequences. 6 months after our wedding, Jessica came over for dinner. She brought a homemade apple pie, not a store-bought lasagna. She was thinner and there were tired lines around her eyes, but she looked more real than she had in years. She and Isabel spoke politely, then warmly. Jessica apologized to Isabel directly with a sincerity that was unmistakable. As she was leaving, she paused at the door and turned to me. I'm selling the house, Dad. I can't afford it. I'm moving into a small apartment. It's all I need. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. I'm okay. For the first time, I think I'm really going to be okay on my own. I finally pulled her into a hug and she held on tightly. The chasm between us hadn't vanished, but we had built a bridge. Later that evening, I sat with Isabel on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air was cool and she draped Laura's old Afghan over both our laps. It no longer felt like a symbol of loss but one of continuity, of love that changes and endures. My life had a new blueprint now, one co-designed with a brilliant, wonderful partner. My foundation was sound, my happiness was protected, and I was at peace.